Howdy, gang, and welcome once again to the Duct Tape Studios. I'm Jeff McAleer, your host, here at the Gaming Gang channel. Thanks for joining me once again. Today, I am going to share my review of the alpha release for Tales of the Valiant from Kobold Press. The lead designers on this are Celeste Konowich, JB Little, and Sebastian Rombach. The 176-page PDF is available over at DriveThruRPG for $9.99. All that said, let's swing on over to the other camera because here I've actually got a soft cover edition of the alpha release. Now, I don't believe you can purchase this. Kobold Press printed up about 100 copies of the alpha release for Gen Con to give out to their game masters for when they were running the hundreds of playtests that were going on. And Wolfgang Bauer was kind enough to provide me with this copy. But keep in mind, even though Kobold Press has provided me with this review copy, neither I nor anyone else affiliated with the Gaming Gang has received any other sort of compensation for me to share this review with you. These days, it is really important that you know that. We're also not going to look at each and every page of Tales of the Valiant alpha release, but I do want to give you a good feel for what's in the book and share my thoughts about it as well. Lastly, I am not some crazy expert on every tiny bit of 5e Dungeons & Dragons minutia out there. I am familiar with the system. I review D&D releases all the time here on the channel. But this is not a Dungeons & Dragons channel by any stretch of the imagination. So if I misspeak regarding something which has to do with 5e D&D, I apologize right up front. So if you aren't familiar with Tales of the Valiant, it is going to be the standalone fantasy role-playing game for Kobold Press. It is slated for a 2024 release. Now, keep in mind, once again, this is an alpha release. This isn't even a beta. Many things in this book could change prior to the actual publication of the final product. So you want to keep that in mind. This is essentially going to get your feet wet as far as Tales of the Valiant. Of course, this is built upon the mechanics of 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, because now the 5e SRD is Creative Commons. It is no longer open game license. And essentially what took place was during that open game license fiasco, which Wizards of the Coast brought upon itself, many publishers out there said, hey, you know what? We're going to get away from doing the third-party content. We're going to look to design our own games. Now, of course, Kobold Press does produce a lot of third-party 5e content. That is not going to change. I review a lot of it right here on the channel. In fact, I've got a couple of reviews on the near horizon for a couple of 5e releases from Kobold Press, which I really like quite a lot. So stay tuned for that. So that's not going to change. Kobold Press said, hey, you know what? We are going to raise the black flag. We are going to create our own fantasy role-playing game with changes to 5e that we want to see. Now, this is going to take characters up to 5th level. So it's, like I said, this is just here to kind of get your feet wet and get you started. There are 4 core classes which are included in the alpha release: Fighter, Cleric, Wizard, and Rogue. We also get 4 lineages. So we've got the human, dwarf, elf, and beastkin. We do not have halflings in the alpha release. We have beastkin. As far as character creation, very, very similar, but not much changed here. We've got our standard 6 attributes. So we've got our strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. And our attribute bonuses are also the same, or I should say attribute penalties as well. Now, there is a bit of a difference as far as if you're using a point buy system Your characters for Tales of the Valiant will have a little bit higher attributes on average because you get more points than you would in 5e as far as a point buy. So there are some changes that are made with Tales of the Valiant as far as the character classes. The big thing that Kobold Press is pushing that's unique about Tales of the Valiant is that there will be no dead levels. That when your player characters level up, you'll have something new every single level of advancement. Something else that's different than 5e is that the players aren't going to choose an archetype until they reach 3rd level. Now, truth be told, I heard that is also something that we are going to see in the upcoming 50th anniversary edition of Dungeons and Dragons, which is what I think they're going to call it. When we originally heard that it was going to be called 1D&D, it was like, ooh, absolutely not. And I had many people argue with me on the internet. Well, Wizards of the Coast says that's what they're calling it. And I said, well, I don't care what Wizards of the Coast says they're going to call it. They are not going to call it 1D&D. They are not going to take 50 years of product recognition and throw it out the window just so they could call something 1D&D. And of course, as we already know, it will not be called 1D&D according to Wizards of the Coast. But regardless of whatever they're going to call it, there are some changes here in Tales of the Valiant that I have heard are also coming to that 2024 Dungeons and Dragons release. One of which, you're not going to choose your archetype until 3rd level. Now, as far as mechanics, still the same. Everything's still the same. You've got your test that you're going to roll a d20, looking to roll high in order to meet or exceed. We do have luck points. That is something that's different, where the player characters will have a luck attribute, essentially. So they've got luck points that they can spend to increase their die rolls. And as opposed to, say, Dungeon Crawl Classics, which also has luck, and most of the character classes and character species get luck points, and once they use them, they're gone, outside of the halflings and rogues. With Tales of the Valiant, you will actually be able to regain luck points. And I do like that. I think that's kind of cool. There is also still advantage and disadvantage. We have proficiency bonuses. So all in all, mechanically, not much changing there. Now, one of the big changes is with spellcasting. And I know for decades, it has not really made a lot of sense with the player character level and the spell level. They don't jive. So you'd be a 5th level cleric, but you don't cast 5th level spells. And I know that's a sticking point for some people. And I get it. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It's not logical. So the new change is going to be spell rings. So we still have spell slots. That's not different. But we have spell rings. So instead of a 3rd level spell, it is a 3rd ring. Now, with Tales of the Valiant, we are looking at having spell lists based on what kind of magic it is. If it's arcane magic or divine magic, those comprise our spell lists. And we've got a good number of spells in here as well. Now, I know there are a lot of people out there who prefer to have the class list for spells, which I do understand is something that is supposed to be returning for the 2024 D&D release, as is the change to spell levels, that the spells will not be referred to by level. So some of the changes that are in this alpha release for Tales of the Valiant are also changes that are supposed to be coming to the 50th anniversary edition of D&D. One thing I do like is the concise spell descriptions here. We don't have spells that are 2 pages in length. And as someone who's a fan of the old school Renaissance, I appreciate that. I like a lot of my information to be presented in as few words as possible. Just how I am. I don't need a whole lot of flavor text to know about a spell. I don't necessarily need to know the entire background of how that spell was created. I just want to know, what does that spell do? And we also have rituals too. So that is something that does carry over. And then we're also going to have a bestiary that's going to feature some of our traditional classic monsters, as well as a few monsters that are from the Tomes of Beasts that Kobold Press has released over the past few years, which are excellent. Very happy to see that. Now, one thing I wasn't too keen on is that we don't get hit dice. We just get a number of hit points. So as an example here, the Crimson Jelly has 20 hit points. I prefer when we have information about like hobgoblins, goblins, orcs, kobolds, lizard men, all of those. I would prefer to have hit dice, because when you have multiple NPCs, multiple monsters that your player characters are going to deal with, possibly engage in combat with, I like to have a range of hit points. So as opposed to, oh, well, all of these creatures have 11 hit points, I would prefer to have the hit dice. I get to roll the hit dice, and then it's like, okay, so this goblin seems quite a bit scrawnier than the others, or this orc seems far more robust. Kind of gives me some cues to use as far as describing the various different creatures and monsters that the player characters will encounter. As you can see, really nice artwork throughout. A lot of this artwork is from other releases from Kobold Press. I'll be the first to point that out. But I love the production quality for Kobold Press releases. Always top notch. Artwork's always really well done. So as far as this book goes, once again, I don't believe you can buy this physical book, but as you can see, the artwork throughout, the layouts, very nicely done, all in all. But I got to point out, in the end, I'm not really sure who this is for. I really don't know. And let's talk about that. Let's swing on over to the other camera so I can share some final thoughts about the alpha release for Tales of the Valiant and give this a review score. Now, if you follow the Gaming Gang channel, you know I really like Kobold Press. The vast majority of their releases get very positive review scores. Some of them I like a whole hell of a lot, and they've gotten 9s and 10s as far as 0 to 10. So keep that in mind. Also, keep in mind, this is an alpha release. A lot of things can change. But I don't know who this is for, because there is really very, very little that's changed from 5e D&D here in Tales of the Valiant. And when that open game license fiasco was going on, Kobold Press said, hey, we're raising the black flag. We're going to create our own role-playing game. We're going to break away from the open game license. And I was thinking, oh, hey, so we're going to see something pretty unique. Now, understanding that Kobold Press, their bread and butter is third-party 5e releases, I knew it wasn't going to be radically different. It wasn't going to be, oh, all of a sudden we're using percentile dice as opposed to a D20 for action resolution. No, of course not. So we did realize that it was still going to be very compatible with 5e D&D, no doubt about that. But the reality is, this alpha release is practically identical. There are huge chunks in this book that are lifted directly from the SRD. And I get it, there's no legal issue with that. It's Creative Commons now. It's not even open game license. So I understand that. Plus, it really wouldn't make a whole hell of a lot of sense for an alpha release to be rewriting everything. But even some of the concepts which are new compared to the current edition of Dungeons and Dragons are also supposedly changes that we are going to see in next year's D&D release. So once again, I don't know who this is for. So if you are somebody who really likes the 5e mechanics, you're probably going to stick to 5e D&D. There are a lot of people out there who do not pick up third-party Dungeons and Dragons releases. So the open game license fiasco meant absolutely nothing to them. Now, there are a lot of people out there who are like, well, you know what? The hell with Wizards of the Coast, even though they completely backed off with the open game license and essentially had to grovel to the public, which I was cool with. I wanted to see them grovel. But there are people out there who are basically saying, hey, you know what? I'm never giving another dime to Wizards of the Coast. And that might be the case. But the thing is, those people have started to move away from the 5e mechanics altogether. They may have decided, hey, you know what? I'm going to play something completely different. I heard Jeff said RuneQuest is excellent. I'm going to take a peek at that. Or maybe they're going old school and they decided to pick up old school essentials. Or maybe they took advantage of the awesome free basic fantasy releases out there, and that's what they're using for their fantasy role-playing fix. I don't know. But those out there who say, hey, you know what? I'm not giving Wizards of the Coast any more money. I don't see those people going and segueing into Tales of the Valiant. Now you're sitting out there thinking, hey, Jeff, you know what? You don't know what you're talking about because Tales of the Valiant raised over $1 million on Kickstarter. And yes, I understand that. It raised over $1 million on Kickstarter, which is a hell of a lot of money for any sort of role-playing game release. But I think many of those backers were thinking they were getting something radically different, even though most of us who are familiar with Kobold Press already knew that it wasn't going to be some huge radical change. But many of those people who backed the Kickstarter probably thought, hey, you know what? This is going to be really different. And from what I see in the alpha release is it just actually isn't. So I kind of have the impression, as it stands now based on the alpha release, I have to keep telling you it's an alpha. Things could change a ton. But based on the alpha, if this is what we are going to see as far as Tales of the Valiant, I think this is going to be kind of one and done. That we are going to see backers get their 2 volumes of Tales of the Valiant sent to them. Some people will pick it up when it comes out in stores. I got to be honest, there's nothing wrong with this role-playing game. It's solid. It's good. If there was no 5e D&D, I'd be like, wow, you know, this is really well done. But there is 5e D&D, and that's essentially what Tales of the Valiant, outside of a few small minor changes, actually is. It's 5e D&D with some of the serial numbers filed off, at least in this alpha release. So I don't feel that this is going to have some longevity out there. And Kobold Press, of course, is going to continue releasing third-party 5e content, which will also be compatible with Tales of the Valiant. As I pointed out before, there's absolutely nothing wrong with this alpha release. It's good stuff. I just don't know who it's for. And my biggest pet peeve with this is that the PDF is $9.99 over on DriveThruRPG. It's also available over at Kobold Press. If you wanted to charge for a physical book, I have absolutely no issue with that whatsoever. We have seen that from time to time with playtests. Second edition of Pathfinder, prime example. People purchased that playtest as a physical book, but the PDF was free. I have an issue with charging money for especially an alpha release of the role-playing game. So it's $9.99, and I'll tell you right now, I can pretty much guarantee when Tales of the Valiant comes out, your $9.99 is not getting you anything else. It got you the alpha release. And that is very disappointing. I said it when I did a first look video on my live show, The Gaming Gang Dispatch. The PDF should be free. Playtests where you're looking to get feedback from players and game masters, those playtests should be absolutely free. Not $9.99 for the PDF. Very disappointed that that's the direction that Kobold Press went in. Gotta be honest, I tell it like it is. So on a scale of 0 to 10, I give the alpha release of Tales of the Valiant a 5 out of 10. As a game itself, as an introduction to Tales of the Valiant, there was no D&D around. It's good. I like it. Problem is, we have D&D, and you shouldn't charge people money for the PDF of a playtest product, especially when it's an alpha release. So, sorry, had to give a lackluster review to Tales of the Valiant. Stay tuned. I have more Kobold Press reviews in the future, which are far more positive. All right, that is it for this time out. If you like the video, by all means, please give it a quick thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And if you do subscribe, don't forget, ring that bell. It'll not only let you know when I upload videos such as this review, it'll also inform you when my live stream, The Gaming Gang Dispatch, airs Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday evenings right here on YouTube at 7 p.m. Central. Of course, when you're not watching videos on the Gaming Gang channel, be sure to visit thegaminggang.com for the latest in tabletop gaming news, reviews, and a whole lot more you won't find here on the YouTube channel. You know the drill. Get your geek on at thegaminggang.com. Thank you very much for taking time out to watch the video. Once again, I'm Jeff McAleer, and until I see you next time, here's hoping all of you get to enjoy plenty of great gaming with your gang.